Hey everyone, we are on episode 31 of Lines on a Page. It's been a bit of a weekend, bit of a week, but we're here now, which is great. So we are basically going to be talking about a couple different drawing techniques, starting off with something that tends to be on the elusive side of either people that are beginning to get into art or they're trying to do comic art, and that's line weight. We're also going to be talking about a couple different things to tie along with it. So first things first, I am your host, Thomas Price, and we're going to do some quick shopkeeping, housekeeping, all the other keepings. Haven Comics, located at 1871 Slaughter Road in Madison, Alabama. If you happen to like the show or any other show that we happen to do, please remember to like and subscribe. Every like, subscribe, share, comments, blah, 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 blah. It helps us out as far as just not having to deal with the rigors and pains that come with social media algorithms. And if you're wondering where you can find me on social media, you can just find me through Linktree at tpriceartworks, and you can find me everywhere on social media. And I also do have a Patreon as well. So, line weight. This is kind of an interesting subject, something I've talked about in every episode so far, here and there in passing, instead of going in depth into it. So, I wanted to do not really like a challenge per se, but I wanted to do a couple different things to basically just kind of state that or I guess even more so, to get rid of any sort of mystery that whenever it comes to a person, it's not always the tools that they have that makes things work. So for today, I'm not using comic art board. I'm not using so-called Bristol board. I'm actually just going to be using regular old printer paper. This is what I start off on when I was learning how to draw for many, 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 many years. And this long before I even knew that comic art board even existed. I was still drawing on normal paper. So yeah, we're just going to be using regular printer paper. And on top of that, I'm only going to really be using one set of pens, and I just happen to have this pack of microns on me. And considering that we are going to be talking about line weight, we will be getting into, I guess, how that interprets itself with pens as much as it does with pencils as well. And just using normal pencils. Now, I was going to bring my mechanical pencil, which was just a run-of-the-mill Bic mechanical pencil that you can find anywhere, basically. I want to say it's either a 0.5 or a 0.7. But unfortunately couldn't find it before I had to come up over here, so we are just going to be using normal pencils. So if you happen to have either a number 2 pencil, that's basically either going to be an HB or a 2B when you start getting into the actual drawing pencil range, basically. So that being said, line weights. So line weight is going to be an interesting thing for us to talk about, and hopefully you guys will get to learn something about this. And like I said before, I am just using run-of-the-mill printer paper that you can pick up at any place that sells printer paper. So no Bristol board, no comic art board today, just regular old stuff. So you can just understand that anyone can learn this with whatever tools that they happen to have on. And yeah, so line weight. I'm going to use this. All right. Now, I'm going to pull up a more kind of like a Merriam-Webster kind of definition of line weights before I give you a more simplified version of it. So Line weight is the visual lightness, darkness, or heaviness of a line within a drawing. Um, and in any drawing, from a sketch to a full-blown finished piece, the interplay of different relative line weights is used to communicate depth, importance, and proximity. How I like to determine line weight is in two different camps. So camp one is interior and exterior. Camp two, perspective. So what I mean by interior exterior is basically whenever I'm drawing a person, I tend to have a much thicker line on the outline of the person and thinner lines everywhere else regarding that person. So, let's go ahead and start drawing stuff. So we are just going to do, well, I don't know. Let's do an arm. Arms are good, right? Got to use one to draw. So just sketching, mapping out. All right. So now that we basically have the outline of this arm is basically done, you have to think about what's going to be the importance of line weight. Well, the most importance of, in order to define the fact that this is an arm, it's not all using one type of line. So in order to make it stand out, then we're going to be using a much thicker line on the exterior. Which then brings into question, well, what about all the stuff inside? How do I know, how big the bicep is going to be, or where the joints of the elbows are going to be? Well, that's when you start using thinner lines. And we do this to create depth within the exterior and the interior. Oops. Almost spelled that one incorrectly. So it's a super quick, super easy way of understanding camp number one when it comes to line weight is determining what is going to be important. Now, this is where it gets even more interesting. When we start dealing with interior and exterior, we're going to be using this arm yet again. And we're going to be using high contrast. And that is also a form of line weight. Not generally thought of in that context, but it typically kind of is. So we can use a high contrast to determine muscle groupings. By high contrast, I really just mean a lot of shadows. That, in a sense, also kind of gives off an idea of line weight. We actually understand, the difference between the exterior and the interior. But as we can still see, the exterior line on the outside is still going to be quite thick. Interior stuff, even though it is blocked out to show groupings within the shadows, it is its own type of line weight. It's not going to be as thick and as prominent, but there's that. Now, when we start getting to perspective and where things are lying within the importance of the line weight, typically, uh, A before the R, what is nearest to the viewer will be thickest. What is further away from the viewer will be thinner. Now, there's a couple different ways that we can look at this. So things that are closer to you. So, for example, if we're looking dead on and you see that my left hand is a little bit further towards the screen than my head, then what's going to be considered the exterior line weights is going to be a lot thicker than the rest of the body. And then there's also, I can get even further into it, excuse me, when we start dealing with like the contour of everything. Sometimes people start dealing with light sources, whatever. Certain lines are going to be thinner and thicker, and yada yada yada. But trying to dumb this down just a little bit, kind of as an intro, dipping your toes into the water kind of situation. So, uh, if you, the viewer, are seeing, pick up your whatever comic and or superhero comic, and someone is throwing a punch, well, generally lines that are thicker are going to be closer to the viewer, and then lines that are thinner are things that are further away. And then I can push it even more so to the fact of, well, if you've got like a crowd of people, then generally, uh, so let's say you've got a bunch of people, New Year's Eve, Times Square, and a crowd of people, but you've got select main characters that are kind of like interspersed between the crowd. Well, then you would be putting more focus on the detail of those people versus the generic crowd audience to kind of give people kind of an understanding. But at the same time, depending on the view of how you set up a set picture is also going to determine things. But generally, again, still kind of puts down, regardless of how you put the frame together, what is going to be closer to the viewer is going to be thicker within the line weight. Whatever is going to be further away from the viewer is going to be thinner. So those are basically two different camps. So just to go back just a little bit, camp number one, interior, exterior. Exterior is going to be a thicker outline to show the shape of something. The interior is going to be things that are not as thick, but it still has idea and definition. It makes things have a bit more character, have a bit more of a personality, basically. Now, at the beginning of this, when I was talking about mechanical pencils, if you are a person that just happen to only have mechanical pencil, you're going to run into a bit of a situation. And this is the reason why I like normal pencils for a lot of organic and character designs and stuff like that. It's simply because when you use a mechanical pencil, you really only have one kind of line weight, and that is whatever uh, graphite that you're stuck with. So a 0.5 is going to continue on looking like a 0.5. So that being said, you're going to have like a 0.7 or a 0.9 in order to get thicker lines. Because unfortunately, mechanical pencil can only make the one kind of line. But when you're dealing with things like anything technological, anything mechanical, anything that has modern buildings, skyscrapers, where everything is like to the vector, basically, mechanical pencils are amazing at that. But when it comes to everything that's considered as organic, so that's, nature, people, animals, you're going to want to have variants of line weights. And the only way you can do that is with normal wooden pencils. And even more so, you're probably going to have to use a couple different types of normal pencils, but you can generally get about 2 to 3 different kinds of thickness of a line with a regular number 2 pencil compared to one mechanical pencil. So pros and cons with the tools that you have. So that being said, when we start getting into pens, for instance, these microns. If you're a person that has never bought actual drawing pens before, and you've only used, say, like your typical run-of-the-mill Bic ballpoint pen, those are fun and they're great to use. And I used one all the time growing up until I got my first set of drawing pens when I was, I think it was like a freshman in high school by that time. So I was about 14 before I actually got to use actual pens and understood that there's a difference in line. Like mechanical pencils, you're going to need different ones for different thicknesses of line weights. Not to say that these aren't good. They're good. And they're also the reason why they're still considered as an industry standard. So pigment microns, Faber-Castells, Copic multi-liners, they're all great tools to use. They're still considered industry standards to this day. So it's not broken. No point in trying to fix it. It's when you start dealing with brushes and brush pens. Now, keep in mind, anyone who's happened to be watching this on YouTube, this is not a sponsored thing whatsoever. It's just me quickly just stating, certain stuff. So if you are using brush or brush pen, you are going to get a multitude of varying different types of line weights and any and every kind of line you can possibly think of. So interior exterior is camp 1 when it comes to line weights, and perspective is camp 2 when it comes to line weights. And those are basically the 2 main thoughts and things when it comes to any kind of art whatsoever. So then we start getting into techniques when it comes to utilizing different types of line weights. And you know what? I'm just going to draw a bunch of little circles. And I'm going to start getting into the other concepts to deal with inline weight. And that's, feathering, cross hatching, contour hatching, regular hatching, so on and so forth. All right. So we're going to list these off as hatching, cross hatching, and feathering. So typically, hatching is going to be one kind of line. You know, so we already got someone in the comments. But if they are looking at the sponsor edition, not hesitate to contact the channel. You are correct. However, when it comes to YouTube, for some reason, people like to throw the ban hammer at anyone using any sort of product whatsoever without stating that they are not sponsored by whoever when using said products. That actually, some of the earlier stuff, whenever I was listing off whatever tools that I was using, supposedly certain countries were like basically just like deleting the audio of that, and I had to go through a whole smorgasbord of filing stuff with Facebook, and yeah, it was nuts. So not going to deal with that, so I'm just going to go ahead and list that straight off right away. So hatching. So it's literally going to be one kind of line. Now, it's one kind of line that you can change where it's going to be angled. And you can also choose as to how close you want the lines, how further away you want the lines, and also the thickness of the lines as well. And it really just kind of depends on what you're doing. So if we're trying to basically put some sort of shading or whatever, excuse me, some sort of shading or whatever to basically give off the idea that we have a sphere. Let's see. I'm trying to think exactly. Yeah, makes sense. All right. So very tedious. But as you can see, I'm using one type of line. I'm just kind of going over it. And accidentally getting into cross hatching by doing that. I'm gonna have to redo this. It's the best part about teaching. Sometimes you make your own mistakes, but as long as you catch on to said mistakes, that's something else. All right, back to regular hatching. So, I honestly believe that the person that is doing some of the best stuff when it comes to hatching is Frank Cho. Um, and to put even more insult into injury, he's doing it all with just a regular ballpoint pen. However, he has talked about at length when using ballpoint pens is that, yes, they do like the bleed and all that sort of stuff. So he usually does a couple passes on a scrap piece of paper to get that extra bleed out of the ballpoint pen first before he goes onto the actual piece itself. Um, all right, so that would be normal hatching. Now we're going to start getting to cross hatching, and that's basically just having lines that are hatched, but then they're going to be stacked on top of each other in almost perpendicular type fashion. And you're able to switch it around, create a little bit more of a depth. And again, um, you can choose whether or not how closely knit you want the lines to be, or how spaced apart you want the lines to be. The reason I'm using a sphere is just because it's the easiest example we could possibly think of in order to teach this. All right, so that would be considered as cross hatching. Feathering, this is where it gets even more interesting. So feathering is basically what it's going to look like, depending on the angle. It's also going to depend on how you're wanting it to look, but it's almost like you're using the element of cross hatching by creating these little, triangles or pyramids or whatever. And it's going to give off the concept and the idea that it usually works best when you've got an area that is completely blacked out. Give off the concept of depth. So in fact, I'll do this. All right. So when we're dealing with these sides right here, so we're gonna have those lines, and then we're going to, like a triangle, do this number. Then same concept down here. Now, the interesting part about feathering is that depending on the person doing it, uh, and also, I guess, depending on the era that the person is doing it, also kind of depends on what kind of feathering technique there is. I mean, you do have your typical, you know, type feather, and then you've got some that are like this. but a little bit of a line right here. And it's completely open space. And then there's others where it's blacked in, but you've got that going on. So a couple different ideas, a couple different schools of thought, but the general premise is basically the same when it comes to feathering. So hatching, what kind of line? Cross hatching, numerous types of lines on top of each other in almost perpendicular fashion. Feathering, uh, triangle teepees, whatever you want to call them, but basically very angular. And they could be coming off as curved or as straight and rigid as you possibly do it. Feathering really works best on things that are organic. It does not work well when it comes to mechanical objects. Unless you start getting into the realms of like biomechanical stuff, and that's where you kind of have to, I guess, go with your gut with what looks best. But the fun thing is that when it comes to feathering, if you're someone who's strictly dust up with pencils and you hand it off to an inker, it's up to the inker's prerogative how they want to put down the feathering. Sometimes people can do spot on feathering with a brush, um, almost surgical. And then you've got other people that can do it with a quill, which I've never used one before, would like to try to use one. And then, of course, you also have people that use multi-liners. So, again, inker's prerogative, basically. And then, of course, you can, on top of everything that we, learned, you can use all three of these basically together. So it's not like you have to use one set of thing in order to put this together. You can use multiple. You can cross hatch while you feather. You can add in hatching. It's going to look a little strange at first when you try to do it, but concepts are still there. The ideas are still the same. So that is basically the concepts behind hatching, cross hatching, and feathering. And again, these are types of line weights that you can use within both interior, exterior, and also perspective as well. Now we're going to get into spot blacks. So I'm going to move over to using pens for this part. And yeah. Two. All right, so spot blacks. Basically, the main concept behind spot blacks is that if there is a place on a page, whether it's a giant space or smaller spaces, so I'm just going to write this down while I'm talking about it. If there is a space or spaces that need to be fully blacked out with ink, in that area targeted with an X, will be fully inked in. Hence, spot blacks. So this is something that I didn't really realize that this was a concept basically until I actually got the comic book guide to inking. And once I actually started looking at actual pencilers' pages, you actually get to see areas that are, either like just the one singular X in that area or just a bunch of them. So, people doing, night skies or space. There's going to be a lot of different areas that are going to be having a bunch of X's on there, and that's where inkers are going to interpret it as, oh, this area is going to get blacked out with ink. So the penciler spotted that place out for them to put the black ink on top. Now you're probably wondering, well, what about the white ink? Generally, if that area is going to be left white or blank, then there's really no point, unless an inker happens to make a mistake and then they're going to use white ink to correct it. Now, there is a such thing where if a penciler is wanting a starry sky of some sorts, whether it's just like a typical night sky or if it's supposed to be like the blackness of space, but there's stars somewhere. Sometimes they'll put something called BWS, and that's going to be black with stars. And it's really left up to the inker as to how they're going to put in, stars. And they can do it with a splatter effect, which generally is a super quick and easy way to do it. And then you also had some who just, went the extra mile and, tried to create, I don't know, what would typically be interpreted as stars. So there's a couple different ways you can do it. But that is the main base idea of spot blacks. So, quick drink of water. Yes, we are going to look at the concept and idea of using spot blacks with run-of-the-mill sports car. Why not? And we're going to do this kind of towards the viewer. So we've got the scene and cars right here. And let's say, for instance, it's trying to zoom away. So we're going to make it into an action scene. All right. So that's going to be windshield, headlights, bumper, grill, tire, And sure, why not? Let's do an explosion. Because after all, it is an action scene with a generic sports car. So, all right. So now that we've laid out the scene, where are we going to be putting the spot blacks? Well, generic idea, possibility is that the areas that are not going to be part of the explosion are generally going to be the areas where the spot black's going to be. So um, we would be putting in X's where that's going to be. And let's say the sports car is black. Excuse me. Been having a case of the hiccups today. All right. So we're just going to go ahead and just go to town with this and lay this out. Now, of course, there's going to be a driver in there. I mean, this isn't Bumblebee that we're talking about here. So, person in the car is obviously also going to get blacked out as well. Then start putting in these almost feathered lines. Then let's say we're going to go in the extra mile. We're going to add in some slight hatching to the explosion cloud. And because I said that the car is going to be black, so Then we're going to be using hatching again, which I'm going to block this off real quick. So this area back here, it's all going to get blacked out. And just realized I do not like that little tail fin that I did on the back of it. So there's a little correction with the white ink. If the pen will let me. Yeah. Okay, maybe it won't. Fun times. So that being said, pretty obvious. Spot blacks is basically the places that are going to get uh, marked in terms of being completely blacked out, whether how small or how big it is going to be where the spot black or injecting in the black ink again. That's where it's going to be. So that being said, you can use all these techniques now, which again still kind of puts into perspective as far as where the line weight is going to be, whether it's going to be an interior exterior line weight, if the line weight is going to be within the perspective of it, whether we're going to be dealing with hatching, cross hatching, or feathering, and whether or not if there's going to be spot blacks. Man, I need to do something about the hiccups and all this stuff. All right, side tangent there. So now that all those things are basically out there, if at any point anyone has any questions about any of this, please just jump in right then, here and now, or forever hold your peace. But that is basically all that I have in terms of talking about all of these different things. Now, like I said, we can definitely go into the nth degree when it comes to line weight in terms of both the interior and exterior stuff. Um, because you can, like I said earlier, you can spot black something and have that be as the contour basically. So like muscle groupings, for instance. So like if you're, you know what, I'll just go ahead and do it on a piece of paper while I'm at it. So we're going to use an arm again, because why not? So we're using, you know, an arm. We can use basically the contours and the muscle shapes to create line weights. So, um, for instance, if the light source is coming in from the top, going down, that means that we can shade in, or basically spot black in if you want to, these lines, and then start getting into this. So certain artists, good Lord, we can go back as far back as Neil Adams to going into the 90s with guys like Silvestri and Lee and uh, McFarlane, Bulow. Um, Not really so much with people now. Um, Maybe Mateus Galera, maybe Matthias Bagara. Uh, Definitely Daniel Warren Johnson and James Herron. But they'll have like a thinner line weight at the top and a thicker line weight at the bottom. So thin, thick. Um, to give off the definition of, oh, hey, well, light source is coming from the top, so it makes sense to have this part be thinner and then everything at the bottom be a little bit thicker. But then you start getting into, as far as just line weights are concerned, and this is where I feel like, well, actually, no, it's not really so much how much I feel, but it's definitely how much that I believe. When just comparing and contrasting stuff over let's say about 30 years. So we're going to start back and look at all the stuff from the image artist going onward. So they definitely brought a lot to the table in terms of just what people can possibly do when they decide they want to do their own IP. And we're not even going to mention the pouches. We're not going to mention the 2 left feet. We're not going to mention all the other tropes that happened during that era. But if we're looking at the line weight of some of these guys, it was almost all over the place. And this is where it created a lot of issues with a lot of people who are trying to copy that stuff to learn from. Because you've got all these people who are trying to basically act like Silvestri, basically trying to act like Brett Booth, trying to act like McFarlane and all that. And sure, they may get the technical aspect of it down to the nth degree, but the line weight is nowhere. And things that are supposed to be further away from the character look like it is literally right behind them. And that's not supposed to be the case. So everything tends to look very flat. And you can pick up, any comic during that time period of the 90s, and you start comparing and contrasting, the people who brought this type of art style to the forefront, and then all the people that end up getting hired by them, and or people that worked at different companies during that same time period trying to imitate that style. As you can see, there's going to be some interesting scenarios where that kind of puts people in a bit of a jam, basically, because the line weight is just all over the place. And you only had very small amount of people who, again, had an attention to the detail, but they were able to basically pick themselves out from the rest of the crowd. So that's everyone from Cully Hamner, Brian Stelfreeze, Jason Pearson, Terry Boston, and then you start getting to the super technical people like David Finch and Travis Charest. And all of these guys were using various different types of line weight, despite the fact of how technical the piece might be, or how, I guess, how beautiful the piece might be. Tony Harris, perfect example. You start looking at the stuff that he was doing for Starman, and like Cully Hamner and Jason Pearson, gets really into the cartoony aspect, but then you start looking at some of his later stuff like Ex Machina, and there's almost like a paradigm shift where it starts to get super technical and a lot of detail, a lot of attention to specific things, and almost borderline likeness to some of the stuff. If you look at some of the commission pieces that he's been doing now, there's a lot of likeness stuff that he's been doing, and I'm not sure if that's just because he's likeness in comic art is a bit of a lost art. But at the same time, it also takes a specific kind of person to make it work where it can visually tell a story. Because when you look at some of the movie posters from the 80s and the 90s into the beginnings of the early 2000s, most of that was done by hand. And I'm pretty sure most of them were more likely done by Drew Struzan. It would be a perfect example. It seems that, sorry, scroll back just a few seconds. Bill Fisher chiming in. Hello, Bill. It seems that shadowing gives a more 3D feel to a drawing. How much importance is line weight to that to pull off the effect? So, yes. Okay. Uh, True answer. The importance of the line weight in order to pull off the effect, again, boils down to some of the stuff that I was talking about at the beginning of the video. And it goes down to two different things uh, within the interior and the exterior. Your exterior line, if you're looking at an everyday person, and if you look at any of the stuff that I do, I typically do a much thicker exterior line to basically make the person pop out. Any sort of shading or any sort of high contrast areas that I'm blacking out is just in some ways adding to the exterior line, but there's also the interior of the line weight. Generally, if there's not going to be any sort of high contrast, high shadows, or whatever, the line weight is going to be very thin on the inside of the outline, basically. So, then again, it really just kind of boils down to the question of where is the eye supposed to get attracted to, and where is the importance of that. Um, then we start getting into the second camp, which is perspective. And what is the nearest to the viewer, that will be the thickest line. Then what is further away from the viewer will be the thinner line. So that is basically kind of the long answer to it. I wish there was a much shorter answer to it, but that's the easiest way that I can actually describe it. And it really is a situational thing. It boils down to the piece that it is that you're working on. Is there a light source? Are we dealing with high contrast and a lot of shadows? Are we dealing with just like an everyday sketch? It could be any number of things. But then we start getting into, going back to this arm, using as the high contrast as an example. Then we start getting into guys like Scott Williams, who will use a high contrast like this arm per se, and then he'll do this number. Probably the wrong eraser for me to use for such a heavy graphite. Scott Williams will start doing this. He'll start adding in these hatch lines outside the area that's supposed to be the spot black, in order to create the effect that there is a contour going on. But the importance of the line weight, again, is really just where are you trying to lead the eyes to go, which is why generally you should really never do super thick lines within the interior of the figure of what it is that you're drawing, laying back off of that thickness and just leaving it as an outline, and having thinner is generally going to be the better effect. And we can pull out any comic in the face of the planet and can use them as perfect examples of whether or not, yes and no. It really starts getting interesting when we start dealing with someone use Bill Watson as an example, Calvin and Hobbes. Of course, Bill is just using a brush whenever he's inking, all that sort of stuff. And his line weight is kind of, all over the place, but he is generally doing the importance of showing the characters and the environment that they just happen to be in. So, if Calvin's in the classroom with, his fellow classmates, well, the line weight importance is going to be on him and all the classmates sitting at their desks in the classroom, and then the thinnest of the lines is going to be the details of, the clothing. Um, if there happens to be like some sort of paneling or windows on the wall, there are going to be thinner lines. So again, really just kind of deals with the perspective of it. And again, that kind of goes back into the whole interior exterior thing, and also getting into the perspective side of it all. So um, this is it's a really great subject, but it also gets kind of frustrating because we start dealing with like situational things. We start nitpicking. We start thinking about different people and their art styles and so on and so forth. Uh, but the general rule of thumb, when we start dealing with the definition of line weight, which I'm going to go back to the Merriam-Webster definition of it. Line weight is visual lightness, darkness, or heaviness of a line within a drawing. In any drawing, from a sketch to a full-blown drawing itself, the interplay of different relative line weights is used to communicate depth, importance, and proximity. So that therein basically is the whole kit and caboodle. Cat's pajamas, the bee's knees, all the other different colloquialisms we could possibly come up with. So yeah, like I said, guys, this was going to be a shorter video today. If at any point you want to, if you happen to miss out at the very beginning, please feel free to go straight back to the beginning of this video after it's completely uploaded itself on the social media or YouTube, if that's where you're watching it off from. And yeah, just going to do the final bits of housekeepings. Haven Comics is located at 1871 Slaughter Road, Suite F in Madison, Alabama. And yes, please remember to like and subscribe. Helps us out immensely if you happen to like this video. And if you want me to do any more videos regarding drawing techniques and certain subjects, we can definitely do that. More likely, we'll not be doing them back to back, but I can definitely sprinkle them in here, there, and everywhere. Which, if you're wanting to know where you can find me on social media, you can find me through @tpriceartworks. That's my username. And you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and also my slightly deserted Tumblr, Mastodon, and Hive. And I am also on Patreon. So that is there. I do want to put out a quick little reminder to people who just happen to be box subscribers at Haven Comics. Some of the boxes are getting into that point of either halfway full or to getting close to full. So if you happen to be getting a phone call from Haven Comics, that is the reason why. If you know for a fact that there's no way possible your box could be full because you get your stuff every week, you don't have anything. So we just don't want people to forget that they happen to have boxes here. We want everyone to get their comics, and especially the stuff that they are definitely wanting to subscribe and read. So if you haven't stopped by the store at any point and you just happen to be watching this video and have made it all the way to this far into the video, please happen to stop by over at Haven Comics during store hours. So you can check on the stats of your box and figure everything out from then on. So that being said, I hope everyone has had a good rest of your weekend, and hope that you start off the rest of your week with a bang. And I will see you next Sunday. See ya.